If you enjoy heartwarming stories that restore your faith in humanity, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss a moment of inspiration. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as thousands of tourists gathered behind the iron gates. Among them stood Sarah Mitchell, a young teacher from Manchester who had brought her class of 8-year-olds on their first trip to London. The children pressed their faces against the railings, their eyes wide with wonder as they watched the royal guards standing perfectly still in their distinctive red tunics and tall bearskin hats. Sarah had been teaching for 3 years, and this field trip had taken months of planning. She wanted her students to experience the grandeur of British history, to see the pageantry and discipline that the royal guards represented. But what she did not expect was that this ordinary Tuesday morning would become a story she would tell for the rest of her life. Among her students was a boy named Tommy, a 7-year-old with messy brown hair and a gap-toothed smile. Tommy had always been different from the other children. He struggled with learning difficulties and often felt left out during class activities. Other kids sometimes made fun of him because he could not read as well as they could, or solve math problems as quickly. But Tommy had something special that no test could measure. He had the purest heart and the most infectious laugh that could light up any room. As the class stood watching the guards, Tommy became fascinated by one particular guardsman who stood near the palace entrance. The guard was tall and imposing, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his enormous hat. He stood so still that he looked like a statue, not even blinking as tourists took photographs and tried various antics to make him react. Tommy tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Miss Mitchell, why does that man not move? Does he not get tired?" His innocent question made Sarah smile. She knelt down beside him and explained that the royal guards were trained to remain completely still while on duty, no matter what happened around them. It was their job to protect the palace and show discipline. But Tommy could not understand how someone could stand so still for so long. He watched the guard with intense curiosity, his small face scrunched up in concentration. Then, without warning, Tommy did something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. He ducked under the barrier tape that kept tourists at a safe distance and began walking toward the guard. Sarah gasped and reached out to grab him. But Tommy was already several steps away. Other teachers and parents turned to look, their faces filled with concern. Everyone knew that approaching a royal guard while on duty was strictly forbidden. These soldiers were not just ceremonial figures. They were active members of the British Army. Interfering with their duty could result in serious consequences. Tommy stopped about 3 feet in front of the guard and looked up at him with innocent eyes. The crowd fell silent. Cameras stopped clicking. Even the pigeons seemed to pause their pecking at the ground. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the guard shout at the child? Would security rush over and escort the boy away? Would Tommy get in trouble? And would the entire field trip be ruined? Sarah started to move forward to retrieve Tommy, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She could already imagine the phone call she would have to make to parents, the explanation she would owe to the headmaster. But something stopped her. It was the way Tommy stood there, completely unafraid. Looking up at the guardsman with pure wonder and admiration in his eyes, the little boy tilted his head to one side, studying the guard's face beneath the shadow of the bearskin hat. Then, in a voice that carried across the silent courtyard, Tommy said something that no one expected. "Excuse me, Mr. Soldier. I just wanted to say that you were doing a very good job. My mom says that when people work hard, we should tell them thank you. So thank you for protecting everyone." The words hung in the air like a gentle prayer. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. The other children whispered among themselves. The tourists lowered their cameras, touched by the innocence of the moment. But the guard remained perfectly still, his face expressionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead as his training demanded. Tommy waited for a moment, hoping for some response. When none came, he was not discouraged. Instead, he did something that made everyone's jaw drop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small chocolate bar, one that Sarah had given to all the students for their snack time. Tommy looked at the chocolate, then looked up at the guard, carefully placed it on the ground near the guardsman's polished black boots. "This is for you," Tommy said softly. Because everyone deserves something nice when they work hard. Then he smiled that gap-toothed smile that made him so special, turned around and began walking back toward Sarah and his classmates. The crowd remained frozen in disbelief. Sarah could barely breathe as she waited for the inevitable reaction from palace security. This was unprecedented. A child had not only approached a guard, but had left an offering at his feet. Surely this would cause some kind of incident. But what happened next would change everything Tommy thought he knew about soldiers, guards, and the people who dedicate their lives to duty. What happened next would make headlines across the country and remind people everywhere that behind every uniform, every strict rule, and every stern face, there beats a human heart capable of extraordinary kindness. As Tommy walked back toward his teacher, the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Sarah reached out and gently took his hand, pulling him close to her side. She wanted to scold him for breaking the rules, but the words caught in her throat. How could she reprimand a child whose only crime was showing kindness to a stranger? The guardsman continued to stand motionless, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd. The chocolate bar lay at his feet, wrapped in bright blue foil that gleamed in the morning sunlight. Security guards stationed around the perimeter had noticed the incident, and Sarah saw them speaking into their radios. Her stomach twisted with anxiety. Would they ask her class to leave? Would there be a formal complaint? But then something remarkable happened. The guard's lips twitched. It was barely noticeable, just the slightest movement at the corner of his mouth, but several people in the front row saw it. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Someone pointed. Cameras were raised again, everyone hoping to capture what might happen next. Tommy looked up at Sarah with worried eyes. "Did I do something wrong, Miss Mitchell?" His voice was small and uncertain. Sarah squeezed his hand reassuringly, though her own heart was pounding. "No, sweetheart. You did something very kind. Now let us just watch and see what happens." Minutes passed like hours. The other children in Sarah's class began to fidget and whisper among themselves. Some tourists started to drift away, assuming nothing more would happen. But a core group remained, sensing that this moment was far from over. Among them was an elderly gentleman named Harold, a retired soldier himself, who had served in the same regiment as these guards decades ago. He watched the scene with knowing eyes and a gentle smile. Then, just as some people were turning to leave, the guard did something that made everyone freeze. He blinked. It was deliberate and slow, not the natural blink of someone with tired eyes, but a purposeful action. Then he did it again. And again. He was blinking in a pattern like Morse code, but simpler. Anyone watching carefully could see he was communicating something. Tommy noticed it first. "Miss Mitchell, look. The soldier is winking at me. He is talking with his eyes." The little boy was right. The guard was indeed winking, a slow, exaggerated motion that could not be mistaken for anything else. It was his way of acknowledging Tommy's gift without breaking his stance or speaking, which would have violated his duty. The crowd erupted in delighted murmurs. People smiled and nudged each other, pointing at the guard who was finding creative ways to respond to a child's kindness without abandoning his post. Sarah felt relief wash over her. Not only was Tommy not in trouble, but the guard was actually playing along in his own unique way. But the guardsman was not finished. What he did next became the moment that would be shared millions of times on social media, discussed on morning television shows, and remembered as one of the most heartwarming displays of humanity from someone in uniform. The guard slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to shift his weight. His right foot moved forward just half an inch. Then his left foot followed. He was marching in place, but so slowly that each movement took several seconds. His expression remained stern and professional, his eyes still fixed forward. But his feet were performing the tiniest, most careful march anyone had ever seen. "What is he doing?" one of the children asked. Sarah realized what was happening, and her hand flew to her mouth. "He is marching toward the chocolate," she whispered. "He is going to pick it up." The crowd watched in amazement as the guard executed the slowest march in history. Each step took nearly 10 seconds. His knees rose and fell with military precision. His arms remained rigid at his sides, and his face maintained that famous stoic expression. But there was no doubt about his intention. He was moving toward Tommy's gift. Tommy's face lit up with joy. He is coming for the chocolate. He likes it. Miss Mitchell, he likes it. The boy began to bounce on his toes with excitement, and the other children gathered closer to watch. It took the guard nearly 2 minutes to cover the distance to where the chocolate bar lay on the ground. When he finally reached it, he stopped. The crowd waited. How would he pick it up while maintaining his formal bearing? Surely he could not simply bend down like an ordinary person. That would break the illusion of the motionless sentinel. The guard solved this problem with ingenuity and humor. He brought his right knee up in a high marching step, higher than before, and then brought his polished boot down directly onto the chocolate bar. Not hard enough to crush it, but firmly enough to pin it beneath his sole. Then, with the same slow precision, he dragged his foot backward, pulling the chocolate bar along the ground toward his other foot. The crowd burst into applause and laughter. It was the most ridiculous and wonderful thing anyone had seen. Here was a soldier, trained to be serious and unyielding, playing an elaborate game with a child using only his feet and maintaining his composure the entire time. Tommy was laughing so hard that tears rolled down his cheeks. Sarah found herself laughing too, along with the other teachers and parents. Even the other guards stationed around the palace seemed to be struggling to keep straight faces. One of them, standing about 20 feet away, had his lips pressed together so tightly they had turned white. From the effort of not smiling, using a series of careful foot movements, the guard managed to position the chocolate bar between his boots. Then came the real challenge. How would he pick it up? Everyone leaned forward, desperate to see how he would solve this final puzzle. The answer came in a way that nobody expected. It would cement this moment as legendary in the history of royal guard interactions. The guardsman began to lower himself, keeping his back straight and his head up, descending in a perfect ceremonial squat. His movements were slow and controlled, his face never losing that serious expression. Down he went, inch by inch, until his hand was level with the ground. Then, with theatrical flair that suggested he was enjoying this as much as the crowd, he picked up the chocolate bar between 2 fingers, brought it up to eye level to examine it as if it were a precious artifact, and then tucked it into a small pocket on his tunic. All of this while maintaining that stern, unsmiling face that made the contrast between his expression and his actions absolutely hilarious. The courtyard erupted in cheers and applause. People were laughing and wiping tears from their eyes. Tommy was jumping up and down with pure joy. Sarah pulled out her phone and realized she had been recording the entire interaction. This was something special, something that needed to be shared with the world. After securing the chocolate bar in his pocket, the guard rose back to his full height with the same controlled precision. He resumed his rigid stance, feet together, shoulders back, eyes forward. To anyone who had just arrived, he would look like he had been standing there motionless for hours. But everyone who had witnessed the last few minutes knew better. Behind that stern exterior was someone with a playful spirit and a generous heart. Tommy waved enthusiastically at the guard, his whole arm swinging back and forth above his head. "Thank you, Mr. Soldier. You are my favorite guard in the whole world." His voice rang out clear and happy across the courtyard. The guard, of course, did not respond verbally, but Sarah could have sworn she saw the tiniest smile ghost across his lips before his expression returned to professional neutrality. As Sarah gathered her students to continue their tour, something unexpected happened. An older guard, who appeared to be a senior officer based on his insignia, approached them. Sarah's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. The reprimand. The lecture about respecting boundaries and following rules. She stepped forward, ready to apologize profusely and take full responsibility. But the officer's face was kind, his eyes crinkled with warmth. "Excuse me, are you the teacher of this young man?" He gestured toward Tommy, who shrank slightly behind Sarah's legs, suddenly shy. Sarah nodded, already forming her apology. The officer surprised her by kneeling down to Tommy's level. "What is your name, son?" the officer asked gently. Tommy peeked out from behind Sarah. "Tommy, sir. Tommy Mitchell." The officer extended his hand for a formal handshake, which Tommy accepted with wide eyes. "Well, Tommy Mitchell, I wanted to personally thank you for your kindness today. That guardsman over there is Corporal James Davies, and he has been having a rather difficult week. Your gesture of appreciation meant more to him than you could possibly know." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She had expected punishment, not gratitude. The officer continued, speaking to both Tommy and the gathered children. "You see, children, these guards work very long hours in all kinds of weather. They stand still for extended periods, and people often treat them as if they are not real people. They try to make them laugh. They mock them. They get too close and invade their space. But very rarely does anyone simply say thank you or show genuine appreciation for their service." Tommy's face brightened with understanding. "So the chocolate made him happy?" The officer chuckled. "Very happy indeed. In fact, I suspect Corporal Davies will be telling this story to his own children someday." "You reminded him why he does this job, young man?" "You reminded all of us." The officer stood and addressed Sarah directly. "Miss Mitchell, if I may, I would like to offer your class a small reward for this act of kindness. Would you and your students like a brief tour of the guardhouse? We do not usually allow this, but I think today calls for an exception." The children erupted in excited chatter. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. A private tour? This was beyond anything she had hoped for when planning this field trip. Of course, that would be wonderful. "Thank you so much." She paused, then added, "And I apologize if Tommy caused any disruption to protocol." The officer waved away her concern. "Protocol exists to maintain order and respect, but it should never prevent us from acknowledging basic human decency. Your student did nothing wrong. In fact, he did something very right. He reminded us all that kindness matters, even in the most formal of settings," as the officer led the class toward a side entrance. Sarah noticed that Corporal Davies had been relieved of his post. He was walking toward them, his tall hat now removed, revealing a young man probably in his late 20s, with kind brown eyes and a genuine smile. He approached Tommy directly, and the entire class fell silent with anticipation. "Hello there, Tommy. I am James, but you can call me Corporal Davies." The guardsman's voice was warm and friendly, completely different from the silent statue he had been minutes before. "I wanted to properly thank you for your gift." "That was very thoughtful of you." Tommy looked up at him with awe. "You are so tall, and you stood so still. How do you do that without falling over?" Corporal Davies laughed, a rich sound that made everyone smile. "Lots of practice, my friend. Lots and lots of practice. And sometimes, when a special someone gives you chocolate, it helps you remember why you stand there in the first place." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pin, the kind that guards wore on their off-duty uniforms. It featured the regiment's insignia, a proud emblem that represented centuries of tradition. "I would like you to have this, Tommy. It belonged to my grandfather, who was also a guardsman. He gave it to me when I joined the regiment, and now I would like to give it to you. Consider it a thank you from one friend to another." Tommy accepted the pin with trembling hands, treating it like the treasure it was. "I will keep it forever," he whispered. "I promise." Corporal Davies ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "I know you will. And maybe someday, when you are grown, you will give it to someone who needs a reminder that kindness matters." The guardhouse tour was magnificent. The children learned about the history of the Royal Guard, saw the ceremonial uniforms up close, and even got to try on the famous bearskin hats, which were so heavy that most of the children could barely keep them on their heads. Corporal Davies personally guided them through the experience. Answering questions with patience and humor, one little girl asked, "Do you ever get scared when you are standing guard?" Corporal Davies considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, yes. Our job is to protect important places and people, and that comes with responsibility. But do you know what helps when I feel nervous or tired?" He looked directly at Tommy. "I remember that there are people like Tommy in the world. People who see us not as statues or decorations, but as real people doing an important job. That makes even the hardest days worthwhile." Another child raised his hand. "What was the funniest thing that ever happened while you were on guard duty?" Corporal Davies grinned. "Well, until today, it was probably the time a pigeon landed on my head and decided to build a nest in my hat. But I think Tommy's chocolate delivery has taken the top spot. I have been a guardsman for 7 years. Nobody has ever done anything quite like that. As the tour concluded and the class prepared to leave, Sarah approached Corporal Davies privately. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the tour, but for how you handled the situation. Tommy struggles sometimes, and children can be cruel. This experience, your kindness, it will stay with him forever. It might even change his life." Corporal Davies looked over at Tommy, who was showing the other children his new pin with pride. "He changed my day," the guardsman replied. "Maybe even my week." Sometimes we get so caught up in doing things the right way, following the rules, maintaining appearances, that we forget what truly matters. That little boy reminded me. He reminded all of us. The story of Tommy and the Royal Guard spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. Sarah had posted the video on social media that evening, thinking perhaps a few friends and family members might enjoy it. She captioned it simply, "When a kind-hearted student teaches us all a lesson about appreciation." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. By the next morning, it had gone viral. News outlets from around the world picked up the story. The video of Corporal Davies slowly marching toward the chocolate bar, then picking it up with such theatrical ceremony, became an instant sensation. People could not get enough of it. The contrast between the guard's stern expression and his playful actions struck a chord with millions of viewers. Comments poured in from every corner of the globe. A woman from Australia wrote, "This brought tears to my eyes. We need more children like Tommy in the world," a man from Japan commented. The dignity and humor of the guard, combined with the pure innocence of the child, this is what humanity should be, someone from Brazil added. "I've watched this 15 times and I cry with joy every single time." The video reached over 20 million views within 3 days. Television morning shows invited Sarah and Tommy to appear as guests. The Palace press office released a statement praising both Tommy for his thoughtfulness and Corporal Davies for his graceful response. The statement read, "The Royal Guards are trained to maintain composure and discipline, but they are also human beings who appreciate kindness." This interaction exemplifies the best of both tradition and humanity. But the real impact of that day was not measured in views or likes. It was measured in the ripple effect of kindness that spread from that single moment. Schools across the country began organizing appreciation days where students would write thank you notes to people in their communities, who often went unrecognized: postal workers, sanitation employees, crossing guards, and public servants of all kinds. Tommy's school received hundreds of letters from people sharing how the video had inspired them to perform their own acts of kindness. A businessman in London wrote that he had started acknowledging the security guard in his building by name every morning. A nurse in Scotland shared that she had begun leaving small treats for the janitors who cleaned her hospital ward at night. A teacher in Wales described how she now made a point of thanking the cafeteria staff who served her students every day. The chocolate company whose product Tommy had gifted to the guard sent him a lifetime supply of chocolate bars, along with a letter explaining that they wanted to support his mission of spreading kindness. Tommy, with his characteristic generosity, decided to share most of it with his classmates and donate boxes to the local children's hospital. Corporal Davies found himself unexpectedly famous. His regiment commander called him in, and for a moment, James worried he might be reprimanded for breaking protocol. Instead, the commander shook his hand and told him he had done more for the public image of the Royal Guards in 5 minutes than years of official public relations campaigns had accomplished, the commander explained. "You showed the world that discipline and humanity are not opposites. You maintained your post, respected your duty, and still found a way to acknowledge a child's kindness. That is the mark of an exceptional guardsman." James was featured in military publications and became a spokesperson for veteran mental health initiatives. He began speaking publicly about his own struggles with stress and the importance of small moments of human connection in maintaining mental well-being. The chocolate bar incident, he explained in interviews, had come at a time when he was questioning whether his service mattered. Tommy's simple gesture had reminded him that it did. Meanwhile, Tommy's life changed in beautiful ways. The other children at school who had once teased him for his learning difficulties now saw him differently. He was the kind boy who had made the guards smile. He was the brave student who had approached a royal guardsman without fear. He was the thoughtful person who had reminded adults everywhere about the importance of saying thank you. His confidence grew. He participated more in class. His reading improved because he was no longer afraid of making mistakes. Sarah noticed that other students began defending Tommy when anyone said something unkind. The pin from Corporal Davies became his most prized possession. He wore it pinned to his backpack every single day. But perhaps the most touching outcome of that day came 6 months later. Sarah received a call from the palace inviting her class to attend a special ceremony. When she asked what the occasion was, the caller explained that Corporal Davies was being promoted, and he had specifically requested that Tommy and his class be present. The day of the ceremony was crisp and clear. Tommy wore his best clothes with the guard pin prominently displayed on his jacket. The entire class traveled to London once again, this time as special guests of the Royal Guard. They were seated in a place of honor where they could watch the formal proceedings. Corporal Davies, Sergeant Davies, stood at attention as his commanding officer read the citation for his promotion. The officer spoke of James's years of dedicated service, his commitment to excellence, and his ability to represent the best traditions of the Guard while remaining compassionate and human. Then the officer said something that made Tommy sit up straighter in his seat. This guardsman's conduct has been exemplary throughout his career, but it was a simple interaction with a young visitor that truly demonstrated his character. When faced with an unexpected situation, Sergeant Davies chose kindness over rigidity, humor over harshness, and humanity over mere protocol. He reminded us all that true discipline includes the wisdom to know when bending is stronger than breaking. After the ceremony, there was a reception where Tommy and his classmates got to meet various members of the Guard regiment. Sergeant Davies sought out Tommy immediately, kneeling down to his level just as he had done months before. "Tommy, my friend, I wanted you to know something important. When I received this promotion, the first person I thought of was you. Your act of kindness on that day changed me. It reminded me why I became a guardsman in the first place. I wanted to protect people, to serve my country, to stand for something meaningful. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that the people I serve are real. With real kindness in their hearts like you showed me." Tommy smiled his gap-toothed smile. Though he had recently lost another tooth and the gap was even bigger now. "I just wanted to say thank you. My mom taught me that." Sergeant Davies nodded. "Your mom raised a very special young man, and I want to give you something." He pulled out a photograph, professionally framed. It showed the moment Tommy had placed the chocolate at his feet, captured by one of the many tourists who had been recording the scene. Below the image was an engraved plaque that read, "To Tommy, who reminded us all that kindness is the truest form of courage. With gratitude, Sergeant James Davies." Tommy hugged the frame to his chest. "I will put this next to my bed so I can see it every day," said Sergeant Davies. "We'll keep that chocolate wrapper in my wallet to remind me every day that the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact." The story of Tommy and Sergeant Davies continued to resonate long after the initial wave of viral fame subsided. What began as a simple moment of childhood kindness evolved into something much more profound, touching lives in ways that no one could have predicted. A year after the chocolate incident, a documentary filmmaker named Rebecca Chen reached out to Sarah Mitchell with an unusual request. Rebecca wanted to create a short film exploring how one small act could create ripples of change throughout a community and beyond. She had been following the story since it first went viral and had collected dozens of accounts from people whose lives had been touched by Tommy's gesture. Sarah agreed, and the project began. Rebecca interviewed Tommy, now 8 years old and more confident than ever. She spoke with Sergeant Davies, who had become an advocate for mental health awareness in the military. She traveled to speak with people who had seen the video and been inspired to make changes in their own lives. One of the most powerful interviews was with a man named Marcus, a veteran who had been struggling with depression and isolation after leaving the military. Marcus explained that he had seen the video during one of his darkest periods. "I was sitting alone in my apartment, feeling like I did not matter anymore. Like my service had been meaningless, he told Rebecca, his voice thick with emotion. Then I watched this little boy thank a guard for his service, and I saw how much it meant to that soldier. It made me realize that maybe my service had mattered too. Maybe I had made a difference, even if I could not see it. Marcus had reached out to a veterans support group the next day. He began volunteering at a local community center, helping other veterans transition back to civilian life. He credited Tommy's simple act with saving his life, with giving him a reason to keep going when he had been ready to give up. Rebecca also interviewed a young girl named Amira, who had been severely bullied at her school. Amira's mother had shown her the video of Tommy approaching the guard, and something about Tommy's fearless kindness had inspired her. If that little boy could be brave enough to walk up to a royal guard, Amira explained, then I could be brave enough to stand up for myself. She had reported the bullying to her teachers, joined a support group, and eventually became an anti-bullying advocate at her school. The documentary, titled The Chocolate Bar Effect, premiered at a film festival and won awards for its heartfelt storytelling. But more importantly, it sparked conversations about kindness, recognition, and the power of small gestures in schools, workplaces, and communities around the world. Meanwhile, Tommy and Sergeant Davies had maintained their friendship. They exchanged letters regularly. James would visit Tommy's school once a year to speak to the students about service, duty, and the importance of treating everyone with respect. These visits became highly anticipated events, with students preparing questions weeks in advance. During one such visit, a shy girl raised her hand and asked Sergeant Davies, "Were you really having a bad week when Tommy gave you the chocolate?" James nodded seriously. "I was having a bad month, actually. I was questioning a lot of things about my life and my choices. But Tommy reminded me that what we do matters, that people notice and appreciate our efforts, even when we think they do not." He turned to look at Tommy, who was sitting in the front row. "This young man taught me something that no amount of military training could teach me. He taught me that maintaining dignity and showing humanity are not opposite things. You can be professional and kind. You can be disciplined and compassionate. You can stand firm in your duties while still acknowledging the good in others." The impact of that day continued to spread in unexpected ways. The Royal Guard Regiment established an annual award in Tommy's name. It was given to the guardsmen who best exemplified the balance between duty and humanity. The first recipient was a young guard who had helped an elderly tourist who had collapsed near his post, never leaving her side until medical help arrived, all while somehow maintaining his official responsibilities. Schools began including Tommy's story in their character education programs. Teachers used it to illustrate concepts like courage, kindness, and the importance of expressing gratitude. Children wrote essays about what they would do if they were in Tommy's position. Some schools organized field trips to thank local workers, from firefighters to librarians, continuing the tradition of appreciation that Tommy had started. Tommy's mother, Ellen, watched her son's transformation with tearful pride. The boy who had once struggled to fit in, who had been teased for his learning differences, had become a symbol of kindness and bravery. But what made Ellen most proud was that success had not changed Tommy's essential nature. He was still the same sweet, thoughtful child who saw the good in everyone. One evening, as Ellen tucked Tommy into bed, he looked up at her with serious eyes. "Ma'am, do you think I will ever do something as important as that day with the guard again?" Ellen smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "Tommy, my love, you do important things every single day. Every time you are kind to someone, every time you say thank you, every time you see someone who needs help and you offer it, you are doing something important. But will people remember me?" Tommy asked, voicing the worry that many children feel about leaving their mark on the world. Ellen smiled. "Some people might forget your name, sweetheart, but they will never forget how you made them feel. They will never forget the lesson you taught about kindness. That is better than being remembered for being famous. That is being remembered for being good." As Tommy grew older, the learning difficulties that had once defined him became less prominent. Teachers discovered that his struggles had less to do with ability and more to do with confidence. Once he believed in himself, once he had proof that he could do remarkable things, his academic performance improved dramatically. He He would never be the top student in mathematics or the fastest reader, but he became something more valuable, a leader in kindness. By the time Tommy reached secondary school, the chocolate bar incident had become legendary. New students would hear about it from older peers. Teachers would reference it when discussing acts of courage or community service. But Tommy never boasted about it. When people brought it up, he would simply smile and say, "I just wanted to say thank you." Everyone deserves to be thanked for their hard work. Sergeant Davies, now a training officer for new recruits, incorporated Tommy's story into his teaching. He would show the video to young guardsmen beginning their training and use it to illustrate an important lesson. "You will stand at your posts for hours," he would tell them. "Tourists will try to make you laugh, to break your concentration. Most of them are just having fun, but it can feel disrespectful. It can make you feel like an object, not a person." He would pause and let that sink in. But then, once in a while, someone like Tommy comes along. Someone who sees you as a human being doing an important job. Someone who says thank you, not to get a reaction, but because they genuinely mean it. Those moments, gentlemen and ladies, are why we serve. Remember that when the days are long and the work is hard, remember that somewhere out there, there are people who appreciate what you do, even if they do not always show it. 10 years passed since that remarkable day at Buckingham Palace. Tommy Mitchell was now 17 years old, preparing for his final year of secondary school. The gap-toothed little boy had grown into a thoughtful young man with a quiet confidence that drew people to him. He volunteered at a local youth center, tutoring younger children who struggled with learning difficulties, just as he once had. The pin that Sergeant Davies had given him remained his most treasured possession, now carefully preserved in a shadow box alongside the framed photograph from the promotion ceremony. Sarah Mitchell had retired from teaching the previous year, but she often reflected on that field trip as the highlight of her career. She had taught hundreds of students over the decades, but none had impacted her quite like Tommy. He had reminded her why she became a teacher in the first place, not to fill young minds with facts and figures, but to nurture the qualities that made them truly exceptional human beings. Sergeant James Davies was now a decorated officer with numerous commendations for his service. He had married and had 2 children of his own, a daughter named Emma, who was 5, and a son named Oliver, who was 3. He told them the story of Tommy and the chocolate bar so many times that Emma could recite it by heart. "And then the little boy put the chocolate at your feet, and you had to pick it up while standing like a statue, right, Daddy?" she would say, giggling at the mental image. James kept his promise. The chocolate wrapper remained in his wallet, now faded and worn, but still visible. Whenever he faced a difficult decision or a challenging day, he would take it out and look at it, remembering the lesson a 7-year-old boy had taught him about the power of simple kindness. One autumn morning, James received a letter that made his hands tremble as he read it. It was from Tommy, written in neat handwriting that showed care and attention to every word. The letter explained that Tommy had been accepted to university to study social work. He wanted to dedicate his life to helping people who felt unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. He wanted to be the person who reminded others that they mattered. But that was not why James's hands shook. At the end of the letter, Tommy had written Sergeant Davies, "I have thought about that day at the palace every single day for 10 years. You showed me that kindness can exist even in the most formal and serious places. You showed me that rules and compassion are not enemies. You showed me that being strong does not mean being cold. I want you to know that I am applying to join the Territorial Army as a reservist while I attend university. I want to serve others the way you do. I want to stand for something meaningful. You inspired me to be brave, and now I want to honor that inspiration by following in your footsteps." James read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. His wife found him sitting at the kitchen table, clutching the letter, overwhelmed with emotion. "That little boy," he managed to say, "that little boy who gave me chocolate is going to be a soldier. Because of me. Because of one moment when I chose to respond with humor instead of ignoring him." The full circle of inspiration was complete. Tommy had inspired James to remember his purpose, and now James had inspired Tommy to serve others. It was a perfect example of how kindness multiplies, how one good act creates another, which creates another. In an endless chain of positive impact, James wrote back immediately, offering to mentor Tommy through the application process. Over the following months, they met regularly. James taught Tommy about discipline, responsibility, and the mental fortitude required for military service. But more importantly, he taught Tommy that being a soldier was not about being tough or emotionless. It was about being strong enough to care, brave enough to show compassion, and disciplined enough to do the right thing even when it was difficult. When Tommy completed his basic training, James was there to watch him pass out with the other recruits. Seeing Tommy in uniform, standing at attention with pride in his eyes, James felt his heart might burst. After the ceremony, Tommy approached him, saluted crisply, and then broke into a grin. "Well, how did I do, Sergeant?" James returned the salute, then pulled Tommy into a hug. "Your 7-year-old self would be proud of the man you have become, and I am honored to have played even a small part in your journey."
Oh.
Tommy shook his head. "Not a small part, sir. You changed everything for me. You showed me that one person really can make a difference, that one moment of connection really can change a life." The documentary filmmaker, Rebecca Chen, requested an interview with both of them for a 10-year follow-up to her original film. They sat together in the same courtyard where their story had begun. The palace walls standing tall behind them, Rebecca asked Tommy, "When you walked up to that guard 10 years ago, did you have any idea it would lead to all of this?" Tommy laughed, a sound full of warmth and genuine joy. "I was 7 years old. I just saw someone standing still for a very long time, and I thought he might like some chocolate. I did not think past that moment. But looking back now, I realize that is the beauty of kindness. You do not do it for the outcome. You do it because it is the right thing to do. Everything else that follows is just a bonus." James nodded in agreement. "Tommy taught me that we spend so much time worrying about the big moments, the grand gestures, the life-changing decisions. But really, it is the small moments that define us. How we treat a stranger, how we acknowledge someone's hard work, how we choose compassion when we could choose indifference. Those tiny choices accumulate into the person we become." Rebecca then asked the question that everyone wanted to know. If you could go back to that day, knowing everything that would follow, would you do anything differently? Tommy and James looked at each other and smiled. "Not a single thing," they said in unison. The 10-year anniversary special aired on national television and introduced the story to a whole new generation of viewers. Schools across the country organized chocolate bar challenge days, where students were encouraged to thank someone in their community who worked hard but rarely received recognition. Millions of thank you notes were written. Countless small gifts were given. Acts of appreciation multiplied exponentially. Tommy's mother, Ellen, watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. Her son, the boy who had struggled and been bullied, who had been told he was not smart enough or good enough, was now inspiring millions of people around the world. And he had done it not by being the loudest or the strongest or the most talented, but simply by being kind. On the day Tommy left for university, he visited the palace one last time. James had arranged for them to stand together at the very spot where their story began. They looked at the place where a chocolate bar had once rested on the ground, where a little boy's courage had met a guardsman's humanity. "Do you ever regret it?" Tommy asked quietly. "Regret breaking protocol that day? Regret doing something that was not exactly by the book?" James considered the question carefully. In the military, we are taught to follow rules, to maintain standards, to never deviate from protocol. And those things are important. They keep us safe. They maintain order. They ensure we can be counted on. But that day, I learned that the spirit of the rule is more important than the letter of the law. The purpose of my duty was to serve and protect. And that day, by acknowledging your kindness, I protected something more valuable than any building or person. I protected the belief that goodness still exists in the world. So no, Tommy, I do not regret it for a single second. They stood in comfortable silence. Two friends separated by age and experience, but united by a moment that had changed them both. Finally, Tommy spoke. "I am going to keep giving chocolate bars to people who work hard, you know. It is going to be my thing. My legacy. James laughed. The world needs more people like you, Tommy Mitchell. More people who see others, really see them, and take the time to say thank you. Keep being that person. Keep spreading that message. Keep reminding us all that kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest thing we can offer each other. As the sun set over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard where their story began, Tommy and James walked away together, talking about the future, about dreams and goals, about service and sacrifice. Behind them, a new generation of guards stood at their posts, maintaining the ancient traditions of their regiment. But these guards had been trained differently than previous generations. They had been taught Tommy's story. They had been reminded that behind the uniform, they were human beings capable of compassion and humor. They had learned that maintaining dignity and showing kindness were not mutually exclusive. They stood a little prouder, knowing that their service was seen and appreciated by people like Tommy. People who understood that guarding was not just about standing still, but about standing for something meaningful. The story of a little boy in a chocolate bar had become legend. But more than that, it had become a movement. A reminder that in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, one person's simple act of recognition can create ripples that turn into waves of change. It proved that you do not need to be rich or famous or powerful to make a difference. You just need to see another person's humanity and acknowledge it with kindness. And somewhere in London, in homes and schools and military barracks, people kept telling the story. Parents shared it with their children. Teachers used it in their lessons. Soldiers repeated it to new recruits, because it was more than just a heartwarming tale. It was a blueprint for the kind of world we all want to live in, where hard work is appreciated, where kindness is celebrated, where a child's pure heart can remind adults what truly matters, and where a guardsman's sense of humor can teach us that tradition and humanity can coexist beautifully. Tommy Mitchell gave a chocolate bar to a stranger. That stranger chose kindness over protocol. And together, without planning it or expecting it, they reminded the world that the smallest gestures carry the greatest power to change lives. Their story would be told for generations, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was beautifully, perfectly ordinary. A simple thank you, a simple acknowledgement, a simple moment of human connection. And from that simplicity came something magnificent.